Hi, it's William from Boxer 2 Valve, and we're back at it. Last time, if you watched, we got kind of all the wires into the headlight bucket, and now we're going to try to make heads or tails of it all and see if we can get the current flowing in the right direction and keep the smoke to a minimum. So let's get started right now. Okay, lots of wires in here. There's a lot of ways we can do this, but what I'm going to do is, for right now at least, use this little connector block. Even if we go to a more solid connector system later on, what's cool about this is a very inexpensive part that's really quite reliable, and it allows us to kind of put the wires into different places and really visualize the connections. And once we make sure everything's working properly, then we can easily eliminate this thing and go with more like gang plugs or something like that. But that's for down the road. For right now, this is a pretty good system. These are supplied with the screws all the way backed out. You can put 2 or 3 wires in there, crimp them down if you need to, and they make a good solid connection. It's a really good thing. So first thing we need to do is pretty much like get these wires more or less, give them a trim, get them all kind of like same length, kind of a haircut. And then I'm going to strip the ends off and tin them with a little bit of solder. We'll get started on that. So we can tell, we know that we have 2 different things going on here, because this is the one harness from the ignition switch, which is the shorter wires, and these are all the wires from the instruments. So just to kind of keep things, so I can still remember all that later what we go through, I'm going to leave these ones from the instruments just slightly longer, so that'll make it easy for me to know where they come from, just in case I have a question. As far as these goes, they're already pretty trim. If anything, I'm probably gonna actually cut the shielding back a little bit just to get a little bit more room to work with. Just take a couple inches off of this thing. There we go. That's as long as that needs to really be. So that's all sorted out. And then the only other thing is these turn signal wires. We left those really super long. They don't need to be anywhere near that long. So we'll just kind of get those trimmed back like that. Like that. Okay. So when you have this many wires to strip, this is a pretty cool tool to have. It's an automatic stripper. You can set the depth of how much insulation you want exposed. And then you basically go to the wire, set it in there to that prescribed depth. Let's see, it's a little bit probably too long. I'm going to give it a little bit shorter, 8 millimeters. Set it in there, and just crimp or just press it together, and it takes the insulation off. It's pretty slick. So we're just going to go through and do that with every single one of these. Okay, got all those. Okay, just missed one here. Okay, that looks like pretty much all of them. Oh, wait a minute. A couple more, one more. That's a lot of wires. Okay. Alrighty, so we're just going to basically lightly twist the wires, the ends, just to make sure that there's no little wires sticking out, and sort of get everything lined up here. Okay. All right, the next thing I'm going to be doing is I'm going to solder, put a little dab of solder on all these wires that I just trimmed. So just to be dealing with potentially dripping solder, and my new cool paint job would be tragic. So I'm gonna just stick some piece of tape in here just to protect the area that I'm working in. Okay, that should shield it pretty well. So just really looking to make sure they don't have any of these like frayed wires, because you put solder on there, the solder kind of bridges that, and then it's hard to work with. So twisting these wires first, just ever so slightly, just to kind of keep everything nicely going in the right direction. It's kind of a cool idea. Okay, for something like this, I like to use kind of a thin, this is a 1mm solder, really good quality solder. So I'm just gonna cut off a foot or so. I also want to protect the front fender here too, so put a cloth there. Okay, now we get busy. Right, I'm just going to tin the ends of all these wires. Doesn't need much, just heat the wire up and then introduce the solder and just watch it kind of flow. You don't want to get any big globs on there. Just enough to kind of fuse the little individual strands of wire together. Okay, I think I got them all. Let me just double check. Those are all good. That's good. Yep, got them all. Okay, cool. So now let's start putting things together. Okay, before we get started with connecting wires and such in the headlight bucket, I'm gonna go ahead and just plug the handlebar combi switches in. I'm gonna actually put them in later, and do a good job. That's a whole separate thing, but for testing and checking circuits and stuff like that, need to have these switches installed. So really just gonna go ahead and plug these in and let them sort of hang here so that I can work the switches and test the circuits. Cool. So that's that. I'm going to get started on the front now. So the first thing we can do is isolate all the ground wires. Those are all brown. That's maybe a good start. Sort of get them all flowing out in one direction. These are the two ground wires from the instruments here, and should be all we need there. And then we've got the ground wires from the turn signals, left side and right side. Those are those. And then we've got another ground wire here, which is, I'm going to say, coming from the harness. And so this one, now we know that these are going to the instruments and to the turn signals. And this ground here that's left over out of all of these is actually the ground source. And let's prove and test that. So I've got my handy dandy ohm meter here. When I set that to ohm and connect them, you see it pegs the meter right there. So if my assumptions are correct, I'm just going to ground it to a cooling fin on the motor. And then that ground wire, here it is. So let's see what happens. Hey, look at that. So this is the ground circuit that's essentially going to ground the turn signals and also the bulbs in the auxiliary instruments. But it doesn't really matter because we can hook all the grounds up together anyway. So I went ahead and jumped ahead a little bit and just went ahead and made all these connections and didn't want to put you through the agony of having to watch me do all that head scratching. Made some notes and some little diagrams to help, and I'm pretty sure everything's right. Basically, the wires on the right-hand side of this connector are coming from the harness of the frame, and these are all, on the left-hand side, these are all going to the various lights and things like that. So let's go ahead and test it and make sure that it all works. And so, first thing I'm going to do is hook up the ground wire, and just always when you've been working on electrical stuff, just kind of touch it and make sure you don't see any sparks, because if you do see a spark, that's bad. So you want to make sure that you have a short somewhere. So that's something you want to, it's always a good idea. Just always look for a spark on that initial first contact. And then now let's turn the key on and see what happens. Okay, so far so good. So we got the headlight and everything's all disconnected. Just the switch is in my hand here. High beam's working. Let's see, horn, good. Turn signals, that's left, that's right. Okay, cool. So that's good. And then let's see, brake light, that's working. And I got the front brake light switch still loose on here. I could just go ahead and plug it in real quick. That turns that on, and this switch works in reverse. So to depress the switch, that turns it off. So that's good. Looks like everything's good. Okay, dash lights are on. Let's see. Should have a starter. Yep, starter works. Okay, groovy. Clock's working, voltmeter's on. All right, now I can see the problem. It has nothing to do with the wiring I just did, but the dash lights aren't all on. So we'll go ahead and fix that, put some LEDs, the cool stuff from Cat Dash. We'll do that in probably the next video or so. But at least they're getting power. And so looks, I think we got it all right. So now having said that, we can go back and look at that. Oh, there's one more thing I got to look at, actually. One more thing. And that is my parking light circuit. I know it works, but I'm just going to test it real quick anyway. And that's these gray wires on the top here. And we need to do, so this does work. And so it's the key on and in the parking light position too, that we have power there and at the rear. So the parking lights work both front and rear. So what we're going to need to do is, once we make these connections, is run a gray lead out as well as a ground that will go to the connection on the headlight, the parking light bulb here. Because originally, this being a former RT, the parking light was that kind of long rectangular light just above the headlight. So we need to switch things around so that it uses this as a parking light bulb. No big deal. Okay, so this is an okay connection, but it's kind of bulky, and I kind of feel that this block is really great for just laying things out and making sure everything works right, because you can always swap wires around. Some of the color codes got a little bit funky in some ways because we're using that K100 ignition switch, and those color codes are a little bit different than the original color coding. But it's, so you see, like, for example, this yellow wire connected to the green, but it's no big deal. Everything's flowing in the right direction. I'm pretty confident. Don't want to get ahead of myself there. It would be a drag. Okay. Basically, I'm going to go ahead and snip these wires off on the left side, and this does a couple things. There's I got plenty of wire to work with. No big deal. So this way they all stay on there. So in case I forget what the heck I was doing, I can see still where the wires are going, which wires by the color codes. So I just went ahead and snipped all the wires off in the same way for on the other side. These are all the wires going up to the fairing, essentially. And so this is what I wound up with. This connector block, essentially, I ended up using as a tool to connect my wires, to test everything before permanently making connections, and it worked out really well. So now a bunch of ways we could connect all these wires together. One way would be to actually use the original connector that came out that I saved from before and solder all the wiring connectors together. That's pretty much a pain in the butt, and it's hard to work in a confined area like that. And so I considered that, but decided not to do that, actually. Could source various types of gang plug connectors. So we happen to have what we carry, and is going to work perfect in this application, are these little flat connector plugs. Basically, it's a pretty sano little 3-prong connector housing. Uses your standard 6.3 millimeter type spade connector with the little ratchet tabs, very much like the Headlight tabs we bent back before. So it's a really quick and easy way to do it. We're just going to be able to make the connections via crimp, and it should go pretty fast because we want to get this thing done before the end of the decade at least. And so let's get started here. And to do this, all you got to do is use that cool little wire stripper and go in and take just a little bit off the end. So we're talking about, for this type of the connector, you just want to get, it's about maybe an 1/8 of an inch, something like that. Maybe a tad more, something like 6-7 millimeters is plenty. And just go in and I'm going to just trim the end of the insulation off all the wires. So that's all. I got them all snipped off the insulation and just ready to start connecting the wires. Now, one thing I'll just mention real quick about the color codes is that they actually, for the most part, have some meaning. There's some basic ones that you need to be aware of, or you should be, and that is that, for example, brown is ground. That's pretty much the case. It's always ground. Brown is ground. Red is typically terminal 30, which means it's connected straight to the battery. And the wires that are green with a black stripe are switched hot. So they're hot when the ignition key is turned on. Gray with the black stripe is the parking light circuit, instrument lights. That's kind of secondary lighting system circuit. Let's see what else we have. Turn signals are the kind of light blue with either a black or red stripe. The red stripe one is for the left side, and the black stripe is for the right side. And there's a bunch of other ones. You can follow them on a wiring diagram. You'll see the consistency of it. But those are definitely the main colors to know. And so without any further ado, I think we'll start putting these connectors on. Now, these do come in different sizes. As you can see here, there's 2 different ones. Difference is about the size right here. You can see how this one is larger than this, and this, so like for a single wire, perfect. It's the right size. It'll crimp nicely around the wire. If you're running a thicker wire or running 2 or so wires in the same connector, then opt for the larger diameter. And there's some without a little ratchet or a little tab on there. These have the tab on the connector so that they snap into the housing, and then they're isolated and everything's pretty clean. So let's see how this all works out now. In order to crimp this type of connector, you need a special sort of crimper. And so this works out pretty well. This is a crimper that we carry. And what it has is a special system in here whereby the top around where that is the open end there, it's sort of shaped like that, so that when you crimp it, it rolls the connector around the wire. It makes kind of a factory-like connection. This is a totally fine way to do it. You have to do it 2 times. You have to crimp around the exposed wire, and then again crimp around the other portion around the insulation so that holds it from coming off. So this works great and does a really nice job. The other way to go is with one of these automatic type crimpers, and this does both actions at the same time. When you look at it, you see that it has the same sort of shape inside the little shoe here, but it's got 2 different sizes. So one's going to go around the wire, exposed wire, one's going to go around the insulation. And so it just speeds things up a little bit, works really well. Now this is one I've had for a long time. I don't have the exact tool that we sell in stock right at the moment to show you, but this is very similar to this one here. In fact, the one we carry is even a little bit cooler. You'll find links to it on our website. But this will work fine. That's what I'm going to use because it's what I've got today. Okay, just kind of line the wires up, give it a nice crimp, and it makes a really clean, solid, and reliable connection. So there's my wires for the parking light circuit. So there's the first 3 wires. I might as well put them in the connector right away here so that that's kind of sorted out. And they just basically, you push them in until they snap into place. You can even give them a little tug just to make sure that the tab is mated over the detent, and test it to make sure that it's solid, which it is now. And keep going. Okay, those are all nice and solid, and I'm just going to move on to the next block of 3. Okay, there's now 2 of them completed, and then 1 more to go. Okay, so maybe you can see in there, so these are the wires coming out of the main harness into 3 little plugs. If ever needed to take things apart, I'm pretty sure we'd be able to sneak these little plugs through that big grommet, no problem at all. And so now all I need to do is hook up the corresponding wires, and we should have a good solid connection of everything. Using the other type, the female plugs, and I'm going to go ahead and start with the turn signals. Okay, coming down to the ground wires, there's just too many of them really for the connector. And easy enough to do is just take a couple of the small ones and just bridge the ground, just loop it to another terminal. They all flow in the same direction. So I can get 3 wires in there pretty nicely. Cool. So I basically just brought in a little pigtail like that, and then put in the 3 wires together. So everything will ground together. Cool, that should work well. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with all the connections. Now just plug the rest of the wires in and make sure everything still works. All right, so there we have it. And I think that's pretty clean. I can kind of stick this all back inside, and there's plenty of room for the headlight, and probably shouldn't have any rattles or anything. Pretty cool. So now I'm just going to put a connector on here for the parking light, and then we should be able to test everything out. All right, well, let's see if everything still works. Looks like got parking light on the back and parking light on the front. Okay. Low beam, still parking light. Yep. Instruments, lights are on, at least the ones that work. And yep, turn signals. Brake light. Cool. Starter. Yo. Horn. Yep. Cool. So it was pretty slick because I actually just copied that, made sure everything went back the same way as I had on my test here. And so that took a lot of the guesswork out and fiddling, and I think it's pretty clean. So now I'm going to put the headlight in as well. Okay, put the headlight in. Now remember, this came out of an RT, which doesn't have the parking light in the headlight. I tested the circuit with a test light. Let's see if this thing has a bulb in it. Nope, just as I kind of suspected. So I happen to have one right here. There we go. It saves me having to take it apart twice. Okay. All right. Just going to rotate the headlight up a little bit so I can get in there at that screw without messing anything up on the paint. That should do it. There we go. Solid. Cool. So later on I'll adjust all that, tighten everything up. But big progress. Okay, throw some turn signals on there. So these are new reproduction turn signals that we have in our program, and they're real nice. They look very good. Okay, now that's starting to look like something. And let's kind of move on to some other parts of the electrics. This is an area that I've been kind of looking forward to addressing for a long time, so let's make that the next thing on the list. Okay, this bike's had a couple of component changes on it, and I think we don't sell this particular ignition control unit, but I think it's just fine. I'm not sure about this voltage regulator. It's probably fine too, but I'm probably going to go ahead and just change that out with original BMW Verle instead, just because I'm not sure about it and I want to make sure I have good reliability on this bike. And then as far as the coil goes, these Dyna coils are pretty cool, and it's a good part, but I am going to put a Bosch on there instead. And the Bosch coil looks like this, so I'm going to just basically unbolt that and put this one on. One thing I want to tell you about coils on these mono levers and on basically everything early to mid 80s, well, not everything, but the single coil models, R80G/S, ST, and then the model levers, I think the R65 too. A lot of them came with this type of coil. And if you see one of these on your bike, if you're going to buy one or whatever, and it's got a coil like that, chances are you're going to need to replace it because they will eventually fail, in my experience. Had a few times where I've had experienced the failure, and it's a misfire, and the bike runs just really poorly. But it's never really left me stranded. It's probably left somebody stranded, but I've been able to always make it home. But this has always just been the culprit, just changing this out and the problem solved. You can see quite a difference in the appearance of these two, just so you know what to look for. If you ever see one of those, plan to replace it. Alrighty, so put the new one in, or alrighty, so there's the Bosch coil installed, and we'll do the plug wires another time, but I will plug in these wires real quick. Alrighty, and then the voltage regulator. All right, so that's all ready to go there, and we made some good progress, I think. Finally got all that wiring dealt with at long last, and tidied this up a bit. There's plenty more to do. I want to take and get those dash lights all working, put the cat dash in next time around, and get the controls finished, the windshield, and at that point we would pretty much have converted this motorcycle from an RT to an S, and it sure looks cool. And then we're going to go on to lots more. So we're nowhere near finished with the series, but we are for today. And I thank you for watching, and hope to see you soon again. Make sure you subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, and to our boxer2valve.com newsletter. There's lots of information about this project and others. And until next time, it's William from Boxer2Valve, and keep the shiny side up.